I'm on the trail of the Old Ghan rail route between Port Augusta and Alice Springs. My goal is to provide a visual record of as many of the sidings, fettlers cottages and other rail infrastructure that I can identify between those two places. Many of the places I've visited are accessible to any who have the means to get to them and are in close vicinity to the major road networks of the state of South Australia. Others are on private pastoral land, and I've sought and received permission to access them from the various landowners and or managers. In every case, I've been welcomed and have received the greatest hospitality from them, and I've been able to gain access to some wonderfully forgotten ruins that not many people get to see. Previously, in episode 7, we visited the Duff Creek Bridge, the Duff Creek Siding, Edwards Creek Bridge, Edward Creek Station, Warriner Fettlers Cottage, Warriner Tank and Bridge, the Peak Creek Fettlers Cottage, the Peak Creek Bridge, and the Fettlers Cottages at Peak Creek North and Algebuckina. Before I go any further, I should acknowledge the now glaring error throughout my exploration of the Old Ghan route, and that is that I've been mispronouncing the name of the darn thing. It's pronounced as Ghan, as in the Afghan Express, and not Ghan as I've been doing. I've corrected this faux pas in any voiceover I've made, but I'm afraid any 2-camera footage has my mistake recorded for posterity, so sorry about that. Stay with me now as we jump back into the time machine, rewind 6 weeks and return to our August trip, taking in the sidings between Farina and Alberga. As would be evident from the intro, we're now at what I consider the absolute gem of both the Great Central Railroad and the Oodnadatta track. And that is this magnificent bridge spanning the Neils River at Algebuckina. It's located only 1.3 kilometres north of the Fettlers Cottage we just left, and some 400 metres away from the Oodnadatta track. So if you weren't looking for it, or didn't even know about it, it's possible you could drive straight on past and miss it. But you really shouldn't. It's an absolute engineering marvel. So much so if you consider when it was built and where it's located. Before I get into the details of it, I'll dispel some of the myths and rumours surrounding it. Firstly, it's big and often touted as the longest bridge in South Australia. However, the fact is, the bridge over the Murray River at Murray Bridge is longer by 10 metres and was built in 1879, 10 years before this one. However, the Murray Bridge one consists of 2 separate, though joined entities. So, the Algebuckina Bridge could be classified as the longest single rail bridge. However, it's all a moot point, as since 2014, a sterile concrete rail bridge over the Onkaparinga Valley at 1200 metres has eclipsed them both. The second myth is that this bridge was originally brought out from England and was actually meant to span the Murray River, but due to a design flaw of some kind, it was repurposed and placed here in the outback. This one is completely false. In 1889, the tender for its construction was won by the Lion Foundry at Kilkenny, South Australia, and, not surprisingly, was one of the biggest the foundry had ever undertaken. Government Labor undertook the sinking of the cast iron piers in 1890, a task that had almost been completed when the first of the 100-foot wrought iron spans arrived. During the first half of 1891, the piers had been sunk, the abutments finished, and 11 spans of the superstructure were in place. It was completed and opened for traffic on the 8th of January 1892, only 2 years after construction began. Just take a moment to consider what it would have been involved building this out here in 2 years. Sure, the 19 spans, each 30 odd metres long, were able to be brought right to the site all the way from Adelaide by train, but they still had to be unloaded, moved to the bridge and somehow placed and secured in position. I'd imagine this would be difficult out here even today. How much would they have weighed? The total length of the bridge went out to an impressive 587.8 metres. At the time, the longest rail bridge in South Australia, and second only to the one at Murray Bridge in total length. This Google Earth view illustrates the problem of inland Australia and the flooding events. In normal times, the river is a mere trickle, and sometimes even dry. But when it floods, the waters can spread out over a wide area in this relatively flat land. The Old Ghan line suffered badly on occasions, and the Lake Eyre catchment areas saw significant rainfall. Here at Algebuckina, this was originally a surface level crossing, and it was washed away at least 3 times where the track crossed the Neils River. In 1892, in an effort to floodproof it, this Victorian-era wrought iron bridge was erected over the floodplain. For 89 years, it kept the Ghan afloat, so to speak, until the line's closure in 1981, when the last train trundled across it. A flooding event in 1974 saw water almost reach the bridge deck. Looking at the bridge and floodplain now, with just a trickle in it, you can only wonder in amazement at the amount of water that must have been involved. This same flood event saw one hapless chap attempt to cross the bridge in his E.J. Holden sedan. He came to grief after only a short distance and became stranded. The next train from the north was forced to push the car off the bridge, and the wreckage remains there to this day. In fact, the wreck, like the bridge, is on the heritage list. Before we leave Algebuckina, there's one more relic I wish to highlight. On the other side of the Oodnadatta track, on the banks of the Neils River, is what's described as the pump house. It has been attributed to the railway and would have no doubt been used in the train water replenishment somehow, but it has no door or entrance of any kind. So as a pump house, any machinery in there would have been difficult to operate or maintain. I never thought to pop my drone up and have a look in there, more's the pity, but I shall certainly be doing so the next time I'm passing. Google Earth shows it as being hollow without a roof. But it does have some beautiful stonework though, of the same style as other Ghan works on culverts, etc. Just turning off the track now to visit the next siding on the line, Mount Dutton. This one is a single cottage built in the unchangeable Ghan style out of local random stone, and also features a water tank and a standpipe. As I drove in, I noticed a lone grave and an old car wreck off to the right, so we'll certainly go and have a look at them as well. As appears to be the norm, the roof has been removed, though why is anyone's guess. Built in 1890 in the last stages of construction as the line was extended to Oodnadatta. The whole place was disused after the Commonwealth Railways took over the running of the line in 1926 though. It's great to see that the windows and doors are still in place, though the interior could do with a bit of a spruce up. Most of the interior walls still have their rendering, which I've no doubt has helped preserve the integrity of the lime mortar, holding the whole place together. These walls could talk. It's subsequently become a locomotive watering point when an artesian bore was put down. The 2001 Heritage Survey mentions there was also a timber-framed corrugated iron-clad pump house here as well. It housed the only surviving steam pump on the Ghan Railway, back then anyway. Sadly it no longer exists, but I suspect it was located where that pipe exits the ground. The standpipe for delivering the water to the train can be seen in the background. In Mount Dutton, service the train that used to trundle along those tracks. Also associated with this siding was this lone grave, that of someone who either died naturally or was killed out here. Unfortunately, there was nothing of any description to identify who this was or when they passed away, and I could find no record of it at all that gave me any sort of detail when I got home and did a bit more research. Rest in peace, whoever you may be. Perhaps he was a notorious gangster who died in this. The next relic on the journey was to be the bridge over the North Creek, just 14 kilometres up the road. It was also here that we pulled up stumps and spent the night on the other side of the large railway embankment that led to and from the bridge. Here the Ghan line gets confusing again. The database I was working off said the next siding, that of North Creek, was 15 kilometres north of Mount Dutton, which meant it should have been about a kilometre further north of where we were camped. We looked, but could find absolutely nothing that might have hinted at a siding, and had to satisfy ourselves just with the nearby bridge. Later at home, and again down in the weeds on Google Earth, I discovered this, another 11 kilometres further up the track. It would seem that the position of North Creek siding has been incorrectly recorded, because that's a Ghan Fettler's cottage if ever I saw one. I'll have to revisit it on another day. We're just leaving our campsite under the wonderful protection of a Ghan rail bridge at North Creek, just short of Oodnadatta. There it is there, the North Creek Bridge.
Alan, you got your water carrier open on the back?
Yes, thank you.
We just have a small problem I have to attend to. Okay, well, that problem's fixed. Now we're off. At 155 metres, I think I measured it. It's a substantial bridge. That right there is the Oodnadatta track.
Beautiful.
We have to be careful of vehicles coming when entering back onto this track. It's a very busy road. And off to Oodnadatta for breakfast. Oodnadatta was a significant station on the line of the Old Ghan. The line reached here in 1891, 13 years after construction began, and Angle Pole, later renamed Oodnadatta, served as the terminus of it for 35 years, until the line was pushed north to Alice Springs around 1926. The town has generally swallowed up the remnants of the railway industry here, with the old station now serving as a museum with a platform and crane nearby. The track used to run down the centre here, but has long since been torn up and removed. The area of the turning triangle still has much of the infrastructure visible, but best viewed from this aerial shot from Google Earth. Moving north again from Oodnadatta, there are 6 sidings between here and Paderca. I've been in contact with the station managers at Macumba, Mount Sarah and Hamilton, and had received permission to access them. However, on their advice, we didn't bother to go to Todmorden, Wire Creek, Macumba or Mount Rebecca, as we were assured there was nothing there to see, all evidence of the existence of them being pretty much removed. The few that we therefore put on our radar were Alberga, Mount Sarah and Paderca. However, the disaster ferry was well and truly fluttering around us and things did not go to plan, as we shall soon see. The first siding we were therefore to head to was that of Alberga. This is located on the Macumba station, and the manager Eddie had given us permission to pass through the gates to visit the site. However, while negotiating a rocky creek bed, I was momentarily distracted and slid the front passenger tyre across the sharp edge of a rock, tearing the sidewall. This was to prove fatal for achieving the goal of the trip. But in the initial instance, we pushed on to Alberga after changing the tyre. It was after 1928 when this part of the line was laid. And by now, the Commonwealth Railways had come into being, and although the trains were still steam-driven, they were larger and more efficient. This meant that water and coal points were now further apart. Diesel locomotives weren't to appear until 1954, another 26 years away. The Fettlers by now had also received motorised transport to replace the hand trolleys and could cover a much larger distance, so their cottages were now also spread further out. Many of these sidings were now in place simply to service the local pastoralists, providing them with supplies and access to the southern markets for their stock. And I think that's the reason that these sidings in this sector have little left here. There wasn't much to begin with any structures most likely timber and wrinkly tin, or corrugated iron if you like. And they were very non-permanent. But sometimes you can still see where they once were. Here there's been sunk a modern bore, perhaps piggybacking off an old railway one. There is also a large tank here, not of the usual Ghan style, but certainly old enough to definitely be part of the railway. I wonder if there's a small settlement here. Or perhaps it was always for cattle watering. Who knows? the finer details of accessing the Mount Sarah siding and Alberga siding.
Turn right on unpaved road.
Missed the first one. After calling in at the homestead and getting a grand tour of the place from Louise, her husband Trent offered to take us out to what was left of the old siding. Following along behind, we arrived at the site. This siding was built in 1928 and closed in 1954. I have absolutely no doubt that this old metal stove would have come from the Fettler's cottage. It was probably once here. My reasoning behind that comes again from the 2001 Oodnadatta Heritage Survey, where it mentions that there are the remains of a trolley shed here. And I suspect it would have been on that concrete pad that Daryl and Trent are standing on. The railway line embedded in the concrete sort of gives it away. And where there are trolleys, there would be fettlers. But alas, it would seem that it and the ubiquitous Fettler's cottage has been removed sometime in the intervening 20 odd years. Other than that, all that's left here are sleepers, dog spikes and old wheels that presumably belong to a ganger's trolley. I'm now walking along the trail of the Old Ghan line. You can still see the sleepers and that here, and make out just vaguely the direction. It went straight down in that direction. There's all sorts of stuff here to trip on and stumble over. Just rusty relics, but there once was civilization here. Men worked and lived out here in the middle of absolute nowhere. Leaving Mount Sarah siding ruins now, and just travelling north. The Old Ghan line is just off to our left-hand side there, so we're driving parallel to it. Trent, the manager of, where are we? Mount Sarah Station, has been gracious enough to act as a guide and show us around, and it's been marvellous. That we weren't expecting that sort of hospitality. It's lovely to see.
Yeah, that's about it. We're going along.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for that, mate.
Yeah, so if you wanted to come all the way through or camp here, it's up to you, but yeah, from here it's pretty well straight back home.
Yeah, I reckon we'll get back out on the track and find a clay pan or something, as you suggested. Lots of rocks here, very difficult. We need a flat area to put a tent on.
Yeah, no worries, yeah, we'll have
Thanks very much.
Yeah, if you hit the main road, you just keep following that towards Hamilton, and yeah, if you hit the sand hills, you got a good couple of clay pans, yeah, right there, that's all right.
Yeah, cheers, mate.
Thanks very much.
We'll just follow you back to the homestead and say our goodbyes and get out of your hair. Thanks so much for this, really appreciate it.
No worries, if we didn't bore you too much, yeah, catch up with you next time.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I'd love to do it next time. Although it wasn't apparent to us at the time, this was to be the end of our trip, as far as following the Old Ghan went at least. After saying our goodbyes at the homestead, we returned to the Mount Deer track and headed for the next station, that of Hamilton. Before we got there, however, we had an overnight camp just off the track about 10 kilometres north, and before it got too late in the day, I phoned the two closest centres that could possibly help us. Neither Mount Dare nor Oodnadatta had any tyres on hand that could have helped us, and would take up to a fortnight for one to be sent up. So while sitting around the campfire that night, we discussed our options, which was a pretty short discussion as we only had two. One was to push on into remote Central Australia with no spare tyre, or two, head to Marla and the Stewart Highway and stay on the bitumen until we can get a new tyre. It was a general consensus that it would be monumentally stupid to try option one. So, Marla and the bitumen it is. Well, we've had to curtail our wall pulling activities and hightail it for the highway. The sidewall tear puncture I got yesterday meant it would be a stupid, foolhardy decision to head into Central Australia with no spare tyre, particularly as we're going along the route of the Ghan, where it's just absolutely littered with dog spikes, which are just begging to take tyres out. So we're heading back down the track past Mount Sarah, where we came from, all the way back down to the Oodnadatta track and then heading out to Marla and the bitumen and hopefully a tyre. Neither Mount Dare nor Oodnadatta have a tyre in my size, so you get that option.
Continue on Mount Dare Road.
My blessed little camera girl Karen can't pronounce dare.
But she's okay with Oodnadatta.
But she can manage Oodnadatta, yeah. Well, that's put a bit of a damper on the whole thing. Mind you, all the sidings north of here we've previously visited, so I have photographed them, so I can put that into a video log and include them as well, but it would have been nice to revisit them with the drone and get a different perspective on the few that remain. Most of the Northern Territory ones are gone. Well, a lot of them have gone, not most. Annoying. Stay with me for the final episode, where I finish off another two sidings in South Australia, that of Bederka and Abminga, and cover what remains of the sidings and fettlers cottages in the Northern Territory using footage from previous trips I've done.